Hello there, Michelle Short here for My Favourite Things. Today I have a clean and simple card to share with you using the new Bear Hug set. So let's get started. This is the adorable Bear Hugs set. I'm going to be using one of the bears, the cart with the flowers in, and also one of the butterflies. Such a cute set. I have stamped the images onto some smooth white cardstock with black ink, and now I'm colouring them with Copic markers. Alcohol markers are my go-to colouring medium, especially for these types of images. Although I really love colouring with different colouring mediums, especially for these kind of cute images, I do find that alcohol markers work really well for that. But sometimes I do go in with some colour pencils over the top to add in some like fur texture or something like that, or extra shadows. So that's really helpful as well. But I am just using the alcohol markers today. I started off by mapping out where I thought the darkest areas would be with my darkest shade, which was E59. I'm now going in with E39, and this is definitely a warmer toned brown. I did want there to be some contrast between the colour of the bear and also the colour of the wooden cart. So the bear is more of like a warm tone brown, and then the cart is more of kind of like a cool tone brown. So I went in with the lighter shades there, the E37, and now I'm going in with E34. And this is quite a lot lighter than the E37, but I'm just taking my time there to try and get them to blend together nicely. I'm now going in with E33, and I do think that that shade is almost exactly the same as the E34, but it is possibly maybe just a tiny bit lighter. I then did blend that out with the E31, which is my lightest shade. And here I'm just going between the two, just trying to get a nice blend. And then for his tummy, I did want it to be quite a lot lighter than the rest of his body. So I went around the outside edge with the E34, then went in with the E31, and then blending that out with the E30 as my lightest shade in the centre. So then for the wooden part of the cart here, I'm going in with my darkest shade of brown, and this is E49, and this is really quite dark, but I do want some quite dark shadows on this. So I'm going for the shadows sort of towards the two outside edges and then towards the bottom as well. And I am colouring in the wheels with that same shade. I wanted it all to look like wood. I can then blend that out with the E59. So this is the darkest colour that I used on the bear, but in this instance I'm going with the same E5 colours, and so it's going to be more of like a cool toned brown. So I can go in with the E57 and blend that out. And now I'm going in with my lightest shade, which is the E55. And I do go back in with that E57 again, just to try and get a nice smooth blend between all of the shades. And then for the leaves, I'm using some green shades, funnily enough. Well, I quite like colouring in leaves in more aqua tones, but in this instance, I am going in with the greens. So I started off with a base layer of the YG17. I'm now going in to darken that up with the G29. Going back in with the YG17 to blend that out. And now I can go in with YG23. Followed by YG01, and I quite like this tone of greens. They're quite vibrant, but you've got some really nice dark shadows as well. For the larger flower, I thought I would colour it to look like a sunflower, so I'm colouring it in the centre with the E79 followed by the E77, and then I can go in with the lightest shade, which is the E74. And then for the petals, I'm starting off with Y17, followed by YR27. And then because this is again quite a lot darker than the base layer, I'm going back in with the Y17 again to blend that out. And I am colouring in the centre of the other flower yellow as well. So I can now go in with the Y15 followed by the Y13. And there's not much space left at this point, so I'm just going around the very tips of the petals. And then for the other flower and also the butterfly, I'm using some pink tones. So starting off with the RV66. I can then blend that out with the RV55, followed by the RV52. And then to finish off the colouring, I'm just going to add in the butterfly's body with the E59. I can then take the coordinating Bear Hugs dynamics, place those over the images and hold them down with some low tack tape before I run those through my die cutting machine. So I've now got my images cut out with that nice white border around the image. For the background of my card, I'm taking a panel of white cardstock that's cut to 4¼ inches by 5½ inches, and I'm temporarily adhering that onto a pad of paper. This is just scrap paper. I like to use it for ink blending sometimes. I've got the Rectangle Extraordinaire stencil, and I'm going to use this as a mask so that I just have the background in the center of that panel. I've held it down with some post-it tape, and now I'm going to add some ink blending inside that rectangle. So I'm starting off with my lightest shade of Distress Inks, which is Squeezed Lemonade, and this is very, very pale in shade, but I want it to be kind of like a transition colour. So I'm going to add quite a lot of other colours on top, but I want this colour to kind of fade out to the white of the cardstock towards the bottom. I actually want the bottom to not be have that kind of line of the rectangle at the bottom. I just want to fade it out to the white of the cardstock. So I'm going very close to that bottom edge, but not quite going all the way to the bottom. So the top of the panel is on the right hand side and the bottom is on the left hand side. I'm just bringing in my images here because they're going to kind of stand towards the bottom of that kind of rectangle piece, and I do want to make sure that there's enough colour in between the two images there. So it doesn't look completely white at that point, but like I say, I don't want it to be all the way to the bottom because I want there to be kind of like it looks a little bit like there's some sort of ground there. I'm not actually making any ground, but I didn't want the sky colour to be all the way towards the bottom. I'm now going in with a Mustard Seed Distress ink, and this is just a slightly lighter shade of yellow. I do want it to be quite a lot darker, like I say, towards the top. I'm kind of creating a little bit like a sunset, I suppose, or like a sunrise, but kind of like a more simplified version, I suppose. I'm now going in with Spiced Marmalade, adding that towards the top and again fading that out. So as I'm bringing the brush towards the bottom of the panel, I'm just lightening up my pressure that I add onto that brush, and it's just going to automatically give a really nice blend. I'm now going in with Worn Lipstick, and to be honest, I needed a colour a lot darker than this, but again it just added to that smooth blend. So I can now go in with Festive Berries, and this is just going to add a lot of darkness towards the top, and although this is a red shade, because I'm adding it over those yellows, it's just going to make a really lovely dark orange shade. So I kind of got my sort of sunset, sort of sunrise there. I can now remove that post-it tape holding the stencil down, and I can lift off that stencil. And I've got a really lovely ink blended background with that nice white border around the outside edge. I've placed that in the Mini Misty, and I'm now going to stamp my sentiment from this Bear Hug set. I'm stamping it with some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. This is a really nice dark black pigment ink that's going to give a really nice crisp image to that sentiment. So just stamping that down, and I did set that aside to dry for a little while because it is a pigment ink. It does take a little while to dry. I can now add some thin foam tape onto the back of my images here, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't add too much foam tape onto his hand there because it is going to overlap that kind of handle of the cart, and so I didn't want to add any extra bulk there, but I do just need a tiny little bit towards the top of his arm. I can now bring in my card base. So this is an A2 size white card base, a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. I'm adding some tape runner adhesive onto the front of the card base. Ordinarily, I would usually add it onto the back of the panel, but I wasn't 100% certain that the ink was dry at this point. It actually was, but I wanted to just err on the side of caution. So I can now place my panel on top of that card base. I'm going to bring in some scrap paper just to really press that down, and then I can also bring in a bone folder, make sure that those edges are really well stuck down. I can now bring in my images. I can place them on top of the panel before I stick anything down. Want to get that placement absolutely perfect. So I want to have them overhanging the side of the ink blending, and I wanted that to try and be equal on either side. So I can now remove that card, take off the backing paper off of that foam tape, and I like to use tweezers for that. It just helps me out trying to lift those pieces off. And then I can bring in some flat-headed tweezers here to help me place that down. And I like to use the tweezers because I can just kind of hover the image over the card before I stick anything down. So I can just gently place that down. I'm not going to press down too much in case I need to move it. I can then remove the backings off of the foam tape on the bear as well. And then pop that in place. And again, just press that down lightly. Once I'm happy with the placement, I can properly press those down. And then I can bring in the butterfly there as well. I'm adding some white highlights to the images using a 0.8 white gel pen. So I'm drawing a line and then adding 2 dots underneath it. Just adding it in a few areas there on the bear, and then also on the cart, and then also the center of that sunflower. And then I originally thought that I was going to add some embellishments onto this card, but I placed them on the card and then realised I didn't really like them. So instead, I'm going to add some white gel pen dots. I do this sometimes when I'm unsure if I particularly want to add embellishments, like I don't want any extra bulk. In this instance, it really was because I just didn't like the look of the embellishments on top. I think it kind of gives it maybe a little bit more of like a magical look. I didn't add any stars or anything like that, but that sometimes helps with the kind of magical look if you were looking kind of like, you know, like sparkles in the sky kind of thing. That wasn't necessarily the look I was going for, and I'm not 100% certain that this worked as well as I had hoped, but it does just add a little bit of extra interest onto this clean and simple card. And I did also add a little bit of black glaze pen onto the bear's eyes and also his nose as well. So that is the card finished for today. I really love how that kind of sunset looks in the background, but with the focal point of the bear and those flowers as well. Links to the products that I used will be listed here in the description bar on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.